Hello everyone, I'm Pastor Dylan and welcome to the Dayspring Wesleyan Church podcast. The best way to stay connected to the life of the church is downloading our app. Simply go to the App Store, search for Church Center, and download the app and enter the information for our church. This will connect you to our church community. I pray the following presentation will inspire you to come closer to God in this journey of faith. Enjoy listening.
We're starting our third or fourth lesson today on Crossroads. We're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 26, verse 57 through 68. We've already taken a look at the temple. We've gone to the upper room. We spent some time in the garden last week. And man, what a just a powerful time. And I have to tell you personally, this has been, it's been, I don't want to say, it's been painful, but painful in a good way. Like, I've really just been trying to sit with Jesus as he's been going through these different moments that are leading to the cross. And it's hard to sit in those different places. It was hard last week to sit in the garden. It was hard this week to sit in the trial and recognizing that you have this guy that didn't do any wrong. And you know what I mean? They're trying him as a criminal. And in my mind, I'm trying to think, Jesus, how did you feel? What was going through your mind? Like, how did you get in the right place when all these people were hating on you? That you saw at the end of it said, but these people are still worth dying for. Like, I love them that much. Like, that just blows my mind as I sit there with them. And then I think to myself, how can I be more like Christ? You know, and so I hope that you and I wrestle with that a little bit today. But I was at a basketball game sometime this year, and I remember watching the game, and it was kind of like in the heat of the moment, you know, when games get a little bit intense. And I remember, and I don't even remember what team it was. I don't even remember the numbers, so I'm just going to make up numbers for myself, okay? And you're just going to have to bear with it. But somebody got a foul called on them. And the ref went right over to the table and said, foul number 2. The parents of number 2 got up and, were just upset. What are you talking about? It wasn't my daughter. And you can see the fans are kind of upset as well. And the reason why is because number 2 was way over here and the foul occurred over there. Now, when you look kind of at the situation, it was interesting because this player's like, what'd I do? I'm just standing here, didn't touch anybody. The parents understood they didn't touch anybody. The whole place kind of understood that. But when you went over there and saw the person that was in the middle of this, their number was 20. And so the ref only saw the 2 and, gave it to the wrong person. Now, the thing that I thought was interesting when I was watching this game is that even the coach knew that they called it on the wrong person. And the coach, who tends to be very vocal, didn't say anything. Now, why? Yeah, number 20 already had 3 fouls. And number 20 was one of their better players. And this person didn't have any fouls. So that was okay with the coach to get this foul. But in the midst of this player, they were like, what is going on? And I don't know about you, and I have a feeling if we probably went around and shared our stories, a lot of us would have sort of those stories where we were blamed for something that we didn't do. You know, it's always interesting. You can talk to people even like my age, and you talk to us, and you can remember that one teacher who got on you for talking. You were like, I wasn't talking. It was the person beside me. And it still bothers you today. You know, like you were wrongly accused, you know. How many of us have been in situations when we're at work when we've been accused for something that we didn't do? Or we get in trouble with friendships that we have because somebody said, I told you a secret and now everybody else knows. You're like, I didn't tell that to anybody. And then you realize they told 10 people, and it could have been one of those other 10. Some of us will have those moments with our parents. Remember that we were falsely accused, right? And it was one of our other siblings. And so this morning, my wife and my daughters, they have a volleyball tournament going on. And because of the area they're in, they went and stayed with my brother and his family in Akron. And so it made me, again, remember my younger brother. But again, there was 5 of us kids. My mom, as a special treat once, she got us these boxes of animal crackers. All right, remember those little boxes they had with the zoo thing on the sides of it? And man, those things, that was the gold mine then, So I have to tell you, my mom put them in. She said, look, I'm going to save this for a special day, so I'm going to put them here in the pantry. I'm like, you can't tempt a kid like that, okay? That's just not right. So I would walk by those animal crackers, and I knew the devil was tempting me. I knew that he kept saying, just have one. And I have to admit, I fell into temptation. all right? And I ate that whole box of animal crackers, and I would like to tell you I felt guilt in that moment. I did not. You know, my belly was good, but I had to dispose of that evidence. And so I put that box out in some other trash can, knowing no one would ever find it. And I thought to myself, you know, maybe my mom will think, oh, I only bought 4, you know, instead of 5. But my mom's too smart. You know, she was like, she got in there and she was like, there's only 4 of these boxes and I know I bought 5. You know, so she pulled all 5 of us kids in. And she, you know, she laid us out there and she said, okay, I had 5 boxes and there's 1 missing. And I'm thinking to myself, like, if we all go in and blame Dad, I think we can come out of this pretty good. You know what I mean? So, but my mom, she went down the line to us, you know, and she said, Chuck, did you take it? And I was like, no. And I mean, she knew there's no way Chuck took it. He's studying to be a pastor. So, you know, he's going to be a pastor someday. So there's no way this godly kid would do this, you know. Then she went to my brother, Wes, you know, and we knew he was going to be a lawyer someday. And so you can never trust those guys, you know, so it must have been him or something. And went down to the accountant, Ken, and he probably miscounted something or whatever, you know. So, but she's going down through the line and everyone's saying, no, I didn't do it. She got to my youngest brother. And my mom used to hate this story, but when she got to my youngest brother, she said, Cameron, she said, I know you took it. And she said, and I asked her why she did that later. She said, because Cameron was lying all the time around that time. So I just assumed he did it, you know. So she was blaming Cameron. I was like, awesome. You know, like he's not going to get one. I'm going to get 2 boxes. Like this is a great day, you know. And then she singled him out. And then this part that she hates, but she went to spank him. And I was watching this, and man, did I feel guilt. And, you know, and right away I went, oh, stop. I did it, you know. And I thought admitting the truth would be helpful. It wasn't, okay. I got spanked, you know. And then I love my mom's comment to my brother who had done nothing wrong. She said, well, Cameron, you probably deserved it for something else anyway. So, you know, so which is probably true. But there was that immense amount of guilt. And I have to tell you, like my brother, I'm sure he was standing there thinking, I didn't do anything. And here I am being punished for somebody else. And honestly, the guilt of that is what I've been sitting in recently as I think about Christ. Because he did nothing wrong. And he came to love these people. He came to heal these people. And he came to die for these people. Us, you and me, for all of our mistakes. That while we were sinners, Christ still died for us. He did nothing wrong. And so I want us today to sort of sit there with Jesus. And I want you and I to recognize that even in the midst of not doing anything wrong, like how he still handles the situation, and at the end of the day, how he has you and me still in mind. Through all the junk that we've ever done, he still, at the heart of it, had us in mind. So let's read together Matthew chapter 26, starting with verse 57. It says, those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance right up to the courtyard of the high priest. He entered and he sat down with the guards to see the outcome. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death. But they didn't find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, 2 came forward and declared, this fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you? But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. You have said so, Jesus replied. But I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest, he tore his clothes and he said, he has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard this blasphemy. What do you think? He is worthy of death, they answered. Then they spit in his face and struck him with their fist. Others slapped him and said, prophesy to us, Messiah, who hit you? Let's pray together. Father, that's a lot to take in, and it's a lot to think about how innocent you were. And yet, in the midst of what was going on and the accusations that were being thrown about and the way that this religious group, this people that were trying to bring people closer to God and get them to live a different way, decided to come after you, to spit on you and to hit you and slap you. And no one would ever be a part of a church like that today. And yet, in the midst of all that, Father, you weren't thinking about yourself. You were thinking about us. So today, Father, help us to think about you. I pray that as we get into your word, if there's anything that I would misinterpret today or say wrong, I pray that as people are listening, that those things would be cleaned up and they would hear from you only. In your name we pray. Amen. So we're going to move through this a little bit quickly today because we have several baptisms to do, and I know that this is really going to be the exciting part for us. But I want us to sit in this passage today. And one of the things I noticed last week as I was digging into this was something similar as I get into it today. But as I was looking at the garden and I was thinking about Jesus and he was praying, your will be done, not mine. The thing that was very moving to me was that this is something that Jesus had put into practice. He was praying, remember, in the garden, and then he said what? He said, may your kingdom come and not ours. Your will be done, in other words. And Jesus was literally at the point of being arrested, at the point of going through all this pain, at what all the disciples were doing. He was still praying and doing the same thing. It's your will be done. But as I was digging into this passage, what I recognized too is that as Jesus is going through the motions, he is literally putting into practice what he's been teaching all along. Like in the Sermon on the Mount, which I've committed to memory because I think it's important that we remember the things that Jesus said, because to me, those are the most important things. But Jesus made certain statements over time that were recorded, and now he is practicing what he preached. And I would tell you this, I think when it comes to a trial of any kind, you and I need to take a stand, and we need to practice what we preach. I think too many times when difficult situations come up and we respond poorly, we try to justify our reasons. Whenever you and I try to justify our sin, there's a problem with that. Like you and I just need to come to the place where we say, yeah, I messed up. This is not how I should have responded. But Jesus is literally practicing what he preached. So in Matthew 5:43 through 48, it says, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. He says, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be called children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing this? And if you greet only your brother, what more are you doing than others? Don't even the pagans do this? And then he makes the statement, be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Jesus just said to be perfect like him. Like, that's a lot to take in. But what he was saying is not that we can be perfect in everything that you do, but he says, but we can have a sort of perfect kind of love. And that perfect kind of love is to say this, I'm going to love God every moment that I can with every being that I can. Like, that's what I'm going to strive for. And then the second part is, as Jesus would quote it, love your neighbor as yourself. So in other words, let's set ourselves aside and let's start to love others more than us. And again, I think that's easy for us when it comes to like family or children. Like, it's easy for us to set aside all of our own things because out of our love for them. So we get this. And Jesus sees us all as his children. And the scripture tells us that while we were still sinners, in other words, the worst of us, he still died for. Like, he still loved us. And that's that kind of perfect love that he's talking about. So I want us to dive into this thinking in that in mind as well. But here's what I want you to know as we get through verses 57 through 58. I want you to stand when the room is against you. I want you to stand when the room is against you. So verse 57 through 58 says, those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance, right up to the courtyard of the high priest. He entered and he sat down with the guards to see the outcome. Now, I want you to know, next week we're going to be talking about outside the courtroom where Peter was, and Pastor Bo's going to lead us in that message next week. But he was sent to Caiaphas, and if you read in John, what you'll read is this first, that he was actually taken to Caiaphas' father-in-law, Annas, who was at one time the high priest. Now, I want you to think about this, who Annas was, because they would often change, because the Roman government, they would change the high priest from time to time, but Annas was the one who really had the spiritual power in the community. Matter of fact, you know what his job was? In the temple, he was the one that was in charge of selling the doves, of selling the sheep, of selling those things in the temple. that at an exorbitant price. You remember what Jesus felt about that? Jesus came in and said, you're keeping people away from God. And he overturned their tables. So you want to talk about a guy that has problems with Jesus? Jesus went and called him out. And so you can imagine how he feels towards Jesus. Who are you to call me, who was once a high priest, out on religious things? So already he was put in a bad place. So Caiaphas was the father-in-law. They brought him to Annas first, then Caiaphas. And here's the crazy thing. They had already assembled all the leaders together. I want you to think about that. They were already assembled because they were going to call Jesus out on some things because they were wanting to put him to death. Now, I don't know where you've been in life, but I'm sure there are times when you've walked into a room where the room has been against you. Where for whatever reason, it seems like things are one-sided. And again, I'm much of a sports guy type person. And it's amazing to me, you'll go into some games, and even as we're talking about basketball, because that's the season we're in, you'll go to some games and you'll see one team has way more fouls than the other team. And something in you says, it feels like the refs, or it feels like this room is against one team or another. There are some times when you come into a room and you feel like because of relationships or because people know your family history, like they're already looking for something wrong in you. And they were looking for something wrong in Jesus. And I want you to see how he models himself, how he demonstrates. Because even though the room is against him, he still upholds this sort of perfect love for people. And I want you to understand, like, they were bringing him into a situation that was unjust in every way. So I want you to hear some of the things that were happened. When you were called in the Sanhedrin, there were certain things that were set up. And Jesus' crossroad was this: even though they're doing things out of order, how do I respond? And so even when people are against you, how do you respond? Listen to these things. The Sanhedrin was designed to save a life, not to take it away. Yet these men, the sole purpose they got together was to put Jesus to death. The trial was conducted at night. These trials were always supposed to be conducted in the daytime, but yet they did it at night when no one else would be awake or none of his followers be able to be there with him. The accused was always allowed to call witnesses in his defense. Jesus was not given the privilege of calling a single witness with him. The Sanhedrin was to judge the case, not prosecute it. But yet in this circumstance, they became both the prosecutors and the judges as well. It was like going to the Supreme Court at the time. And here's something incredible. If you had people that gave false testimonies, those people would end up being subject to the same punishment that was going after the defendant. So those who gave false testimony should have been put to death by crucifixion. If the death penalty was sought, I thought this was overwhelmingly interesting to me. If you were seeking the death penalty, the Sanhedrin was required to observe a 3-day period of prayer and fasting to make sure that they get it right. And then here's the other incredible thing to me. If the Sanhedrin came to a unanimous decision on the death penalty, it was actually thrown out. And the reason why is they felt like somebody should be graceful in that moment, that everyone deserves somebody on their side. And yet in this circumstance, Jesus wasn't. So there's kind of lists and lists of everything that was going on. A prisoner was not supposed to testify against himself. If a confession was used, he was not allowed to use his own confession. All these things were going on. Listen, this was the most unjust thing that was going on. And yet in the middle of this is exactly what Jesus needed to go through in order to get himself on the cross. You understand what's happening? Jesus had to take the foul that I committed. Jesus had to take the foul that you committed. And even though all these things were being accused against him, Jesus had to still take the stand. So I want you to know this, secondly, is stand when you are falsely accused. So 59 through 61 says the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death, but they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, 2 came forward and declared, this fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. Now, again, what's interesting is people are giving false evidence. They're making false accusations. And in the middle of this, they didn't do anything. Like, it wasn't found to be true. They should have put them to death, but they didn't. But then 2 witnesses came forward and said simply, he said that he was going to destroy the temple and then in 3 days rebuild it. Now, is that a true statement? Yes, it's a true statement. It's exactly what Jesus said. The problem is this. When you look at the 10 Commandments, we often think it says, do not lie. What does it say? Do not bear false witness or false testimony. When Jesus said he was going to destroy the temple, what did he mean? He didn't mean that he was literally going to destroy the temple and remove it brick by brick, did he? I mean, you can't do that and then build it in 3 days, right? But he was talking about himself, that you can destroy this temple, but in 3 days he's going to come back alive, and that's exactly what he did. But they bear false witness, and I have to tell you, and I bet there are certain things that you've said in life where somebody's twisted those words. And how do you respond, or how do you react to that? What was Jesus' reaction? I like what happens in Matthew chapter 5 that he says in verses 11 through 12. He says, blessed are you when people insult you, they persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. He says, rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. And what you're going to understand is even here is they still persecuted Jesus when they falsely accused him. But Jesus' response wasn't to retaliate, wasn't to attack. Instead, he continued to love. And I have to tell you, if you look at this whole story of Jesus, think about this. If they started accusing him and Jesus went after them with his words, and if Jesus got really crazy with them, you know, they would have got defensive and they would have went after him more and more, right? Jesus handled this the most perfect way he could. And because of that, he ultimately showed his love for others. And I thought, how many times have I been accused of something and I go in ready to fight? And I have to tell you, it's a battle I never win. Because defenses are being built up. And people have to be right so much. But Jesus, what happens is this, is Jesus is practicing when he preaches, says, this is all for his glory. And so there are some things that I go through in life that I think, man, I don't understand why I have to go through this. But I want you to think, maybe it's for his glory and not yours. This was a step that Jesus had to take in order for you and I to receive eternal life. And here's what I want you to know, because this is what I love about Jesus. Verses 62 and 63, I want you to understand that we need to take a stand and don't take the bait. Because the high priest stood and said to Jesus, are you not going to answer? What is this testimony these men are bringing against you? But Jesus, it says, remain silent. And then the high priest said to him, I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. And again, I think he chose wisely. Because here's what he knew. I don't have the room. This is not my home field. Anything I say can and will be used against me. So the best thing for me to do is what? Stay silent. Matter of fact, he told us this in Matthew chapter 7 when he was talking about judging. And after he gets done with this, in verse 6, he says this, do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. In other words, what he was saying is, sometimes people aren't ready to hear what you have to say. And you know this is true because you've had those arguments probably with your kids from time to time or your family members, and you're getting into it, and they're not ready to hear what you have to say. Matter of fact, you say anything, and they're like, they turn and they start tearing on you, and then you start tearing back on them, and it's just a bad situation. But I've always found that sometimes, like, I just have to say the truth, then I walk away, and then there comes a point in time when we can really have the conversation because they're ready to hear. Jesus knew that if he said certain things at this moment, it wasn't going to go well. And so I would tell you and I, don't take the bait. And what Jesus ends up doing is he stands and speaks the truth, because he says, look, I charge you under oath. I want you to say the right thing. And Jesus says in verse 64, you have said so. Jesus replied, but I say to all of you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. You know what Jesus was doing? He wasn't arguing with them. He was giving them the truth because he wanted them to remember this moment. Because when his death happened and when his resurrection happens, he wants them to remember that he called it that day. Remember, the temple would be destroyed and 3 days would rise again. He's saying, I'm going to be with my Father in heaven. And I want you to take note of that. And so I love this response from Jesus as he's speaking the truth. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 33 through 37, it basically says this: again, you have heard that was said to people long ago, do not break your oaths, but keep the oaths you have made to the Lord. He tells us don't swear at all, either by heaven or Jerusalem, for these are God's places. He says, basically, let your yes be yes and your no be no. You know, if you're a person that speaks truth, people are going to know who you are. I mean, you think about this context. What Jesus was saying is, and he already reported this to them from time to time. Look, you guys saw me in the temple courts. You saw when I was in there and I was talking. You never had a problem with anything that I said. Like, I've always told you guys the truth. You've seen the way I've healed. You've seen the way I've taken care of people. Have I ever done anything that was destructive to humanity? And so I'm a person of my word. And so he says, so you've seen these very things. And he simply let his yes be yes and his no be no. And then at the end of the day, this is what I love, because Jesus, and I think this is his principle to us, not only should we speak the truth, but we should stand and don't try to retaliate. Don't try to retaliate. It says, then the high priest tore his clothes and said, he has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? He is worthy of death, they answered. Then they spit on his face, struck him with their fists. Others slapped him and said, prophesy to us, Messiah, who hit you? You see what the high priest is doing? He's grandstanding here is what he's doing. He's saying, oh, that's what you're saying about yourself? And so he tears his clothes. Now listen, this is a big moment. If you read in Leviticus 21, what you're going to note is this. They give sort of the rules for the priest. You know what a priest is not allowed to do? They're not allowed to tear their clothes. And if they did tear their clothes, guess what? It was as if they were never a high priest to begin with. Now I want you to think about the power in this moment that this priest did for Jesus. He ripped his clothes and literally said, I am no longer a priest. And he did that in front of Jesus, who is the high priest. He denounced himself in the presence of Jesus without even realizing it. And because of it, they spit on him, they hit him, and they slapped him. And Jesus tells us in Matthew 5:38 through 42, you've heard that said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But he says, I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn him the other also. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. If someone sues you, wants you to take your tunic, let them have your cloak as well. In other words, he says, give more to those people. Why? Because that's going to speak volumes. And what Jesus said is, you can spit on me, you can beat me, you can hit me. And I'm going to still go to the cross for you. Why? Because I love you. And you know, I think some of us probably have a hard time with that idea of him being spit on. But I want to suggest something to you today. Some of us are still spitting on the face of Jesus. And you know why? Because he wants you to stand and he wants you to accept this free gift of salvation that he's given you. But some of you will say, I'm not going to accept it. And what you're literally telling him is, what you did, it doesn't matter. And so you and I spit in his face. You see, Jesus took the foul that you and I deserved. Why? Because he wanted to show us grace. Here's the cool thing today. We have several people in our church who have taken a stand with Christ and they've accepted that free gift of salvation. And today we get to hear their testimonies. And you're going to hear their video testimonies. You're going to see them baptized. Here's something I decided to do differently now. I don't know why I didn't ever think about this, but I think this is pretty powerful. Hopefully you'll agree with me. But when we pulled the different people together and the different ones that want to be baptized, we said, who do you want to baptize you? And they would say one of the pastors. And then we said, is there anybody else that was influential in your life that you want there with you? And it's pretty cool because some of the kids said, I want my dad, or I want my mom. Some of them said, there's another person in the church that I want to stand by me. You know how powerful that is? And listen, I want all of you to know that what you do makes a huge difference in people coming to Christ. You know, I just speak here, And you know that when you come here, this is what you're going to hear. But what you live out in the world makes a huge difference in people's lives. And I'm hoping someday, this sounds really bad, but I'm going to be okay if I never have to get into another baptismal. Because if all of you are doing the work, that's fantastic. And that's where we need to get to. So let's celebrate these baptisms today. And when we baptize and they come up, your job is to cheer and to clap your hands and to love on these people who are now saying that this is the stand I want to take.
Thanks again for listening. If you are located in the Marion area, we would love to have you join us at one of our Sunday morning gatherings. For directions, service times, and information about our fantastic children and student ministries, please visit us at dayspringwesleyan.org. That's dayspringwesleyan.org.